My sister called and said, "The ex who nearly killed you is in town, looking for you and your baby." Suddenly I couldn't breathe and my daughter felt so fragile in my hands, like if I blinked she'd disappear. My sister said, "Don't panic, but someone saw him at a gas station near the state line. Maybe it's just a coincidence." But I knew it wasn't. My sister didn't know about the text I'd gotten last week from an unknown number. "How's the baby?" At the time I'd blocked it and told myself it couldn't be him. But I knew then, and I knew now. I pulled my daughter from the bath and wrapped her in a towel, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold her. Jackson wasn't supposed to know where I lived, and he definitely wasn't supposed to know about the baby. The last time I'd seen him, I was unconscious on our kitchen floor with 3 broken ribs, miraculously not losing the pregnancy I'd been hiding from him. That was the last straw. I ran and never looked back. I carried Lily to her nursery and locked every window, checking them all twice. She was only 10 months old, just starting to pull herself up on furniture, completely defenseless against someone who'd once broken my arm for coming home 10 minutes late. I'd moved 800 miles to keep her safe from him, changed my name, deleted all social media, and started over. Now all I could think about was that text and the way it was phrased. Not, "Do you have a baby?" but, "How's the baby?" Like he already knew everything. I put Lily in her crib and went to the window, scanning the street. Cars were parked where they always were. But was that sedan new? Then my phone buzzed with another unknown number, and I didn't want to look, but I had to. The message said, "She has your eyes." My legs gave out and I slid down the wall, trying not to scream because I didn't want to scare Lily. He'd seen her somewhere, been close enough to see her eyes, and I didn't even know when or where. The park yesterday when she was on the swings? The grocery store where she always smiled at strangers from the cart? I called 911, but what could I say? They'd tell me to file a restraining order, but paper wouldn't stop Jackson. I hung up before they answered and called my landlord, begging him to change the locks immediately, but he said he could come by tomorrow, and tomorrow might be too late. I grabbed a kitchen chair and wedged it under the front door handle, then did the same with the back door. Lily started crying with that normal baby cry that suddenly sounded so loud it felt like a beacon calling him to us. I picked her up and she grabbed my hair, babbling "Mama, Mama" like she always did. So innocent, with no idea that her father was a monster who'd once held a knife to my throat for talking to a male cashier. Another text came through. "Nice apartment. Ground floor was a bad choice." I ran to the bedroom with Lily and locked that door too. It was getting dark outside with every passing car making me jump. Footsteps echoed on the sidewalk and I told myself it was just someone walking their dog. But what if it wasn't? The motion light in my backyard suddenly blazed on, and I peered through the blinds but saw nothing. Sometimes cats triggered it, but the light stayed on for 30 seconds, went off, then immediately turned on again like something was moving out there in deliberate patterns. I grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen and my phone to call 911 again, but then I stopped because if Jackson was out there and heard sirens, he'd just run and come back later when I wasn't expecting it. Maybe tonight while I was sleeping, or tomorrow at the park when my guard was down. The motion light went off and the house fell silent except for Lily's breathing against my shoulder. Then I heard the sound of the bathroom window sliding open, the one I'd checked 3 times, but the lock must have been broken, or he'd broken it from outside. Footsteps moved through my hallway with slow deliberation like he wanted me to hear him coming. My bedroom door handle turned but caught on the lock, and the footsteps stopped right outside. Jackson's voice came through the door, calm and familiar. "Open the door, Ava. I just want to meet my daughter." I held Lily tighter. "Go away or I'll call the police." He laughed and said, "With what phone? The one you left on the kitchen counter when you ran to the bedroom?" My blood went cold when I realized he was right. I'd put it down when I grabbed the knife. Jackson was 5 steps ahead of me, and I watched Lily's tiny body shake as my arms started trembling. He said, "You took a year from me, a whole year of my child's life, and now you owe me." The door handle rattled harder before stopping, and then I heard the sound that made my heart stop, the scrape of metal on metal as he picked the lock. Jackson had learned a lot of things during his time in prison, and lock-picking was one of them. The lock clicked open, and the door swung inward to reveal him standing there, looking exactly the same except for a new scar across his jaw. He looked at Lily in my arms and smiled the way he used to before the hitting started. "So what's her name?" I held the knife between us and said, "You need to leave right now." He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a second knife, longer and sharper than mine. He said, "Give me my daughter, or I'll take her from what's left of you." I lunged sideways toward the bathroom door with Lily clutched against my chest, putting my body between her and Jackson's knife. He moves to block me, but I'm faster, driven by pure animal instinct to protect my baby, and I shoulder-checked the bathroom door hard enough to rattle the frame. I squeeze through the bathroom doorway and slam it behind me, hearing Jackson's footsteps right there, but the flimsy lock won't hold more than seconds. The window I'd checked 3 times earlier is still hanging open where he'd broken in, cool night air pouring through, and I realize it's my only way out. I wrap Lily tighter in her damp towel and climb onto the toilet, then the sink, my hands shaking so badly I almost drop her. Behind me, the door handle rattles violently, and Jackson's voice turns from calm to enraged, demanding I open up right now, but I'm already pushing through the window frame. My shoulder scrapes against the rough wood and I feel splinters dig in, but I don't care. I just keep moving forward with Lily pressed against me. I drop into the small backyard with Lily, land wrong on my ankle, Feel something twist painfully, but I don't stop moving. The motion light blazes on, and I hear the bathroom door splinter behind me as I sprint across the wet grass toward Fletcher's house next door, the only place with lights still on at this hour. My ankle screams with every step, but I push through it, focusing only on reaching safety, on getting Lily away from the man who wants to hurt us. I'm sobbing and running, and Lily's crying now, confused and scared by my terror, and I can hear Jackson dropping through the window behind us. Fletcher's porch is maybe 30 feet away, but it feels like miles, and I'm praying he's actually home, and not just someone who leaves lights on for security. The wet grass makes my feet slip, and I nearly go down, but I catch myself, adjusting my grip on Lily, who's wailing louder now. I can hear Jackson's footsteps gaining on us, heavy and deliberate, and I know if he catches us out here in the open, there's nothing I can do to stop him. I hit Fletcher's porch and pound on his door with my palm, gasping, "Help, please, someone help," while looking back to see Jackson's silhouette crossing my yard. A camera blinks red above the doorbell, and I hear movement inside, footsteps approaching, and I'm begging under my breath for him to hurry. The seconds stretch out forever as I wait for the door to open, my back pressed against it, watching Jackson get closer. Lily's face is red from crying, and her little hands grip my shirt, and I'm trying to calm her while also screaming inside for Fletcher to open this door right now. The door swings open, and Fletcher stands there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, taking in my wild expression and the baby in my arms, and I manage to choke out, "Call 911, he's right behind me." Fletcher's eyes go wide as he spots Jackson emerging from the shadows, and he yanks us inside and slams the door, throwing the deadbolt. I hear Jackson hit the door a second later, pounding on it, and Fletcher's already pulling out his phone and dialing while I collapse against his wall, trying to catch my breath and calm Lily, who's wailing now. Through the window, I see Jackson pause at the edge of Fletcher's yard, his face visible in the porch light for just a moment before he turns and disappears into the darkness between houses, and I realize he's running. He knows the police are coming, and he's not stupid enough to stick around. But that doesn't make me feel any safer because he'll just come back later when we're not expecting it. The 911 operator's voice comes through Fletcher's speakerphone asking for our location and emergency, and I give clipped answers about my ex-partner breaking in with a knife, while carefully not saying my actual address out loud in case Jackson's still close enough to hear. Lily's fussing against my shoulder, and I'm rocking her automatically while my eyes stay locked on the windows, scanning for any sign of Jackson returning. Fletcher's house smells like coffee and laundry detergent, normal smells that feel surreal given what just happened, and I'm shaking so hard my teeth are chattering. In the distance, I finally hear sirens starting to wail. That distinctive sound that means help is actually coming, and some of the tension in my chest releases just slightly. The operator is asking me questions about Jackson, about whether he's still on the property, about whether I or the baby are injured, and I answer each one in short bursts, while trying to keep my voice steady. Fletcher brings me a blanket and wraps it around Lily and me, and I notice his hands are shaking too, probably from the adrenaline of having a violent man show up at his door in the middle of the night. 2 police officers arrive within 6 minutes and immediately search my backyard and apartment, while a third stays with us at Fletcher's house taking initial information. I watch through the window as their flashlights sweep across my yard, checking behind bushes and along the fence line, looking for any sign Jackson might still be hiding nearby. They find obvious pry marks on the bathroom window frame, my kitchen knife abandoned on my bedroom floor where Jackson dropped it when he ran, and my phone sitting on the kitchen counter exactly where he said it would be, which makes my skin crawl all over again. The officer taking my statement is young, maybe mid-20s, and he writes everything down in a small notepad while asking careful questions about my history with Jackson. I explain about the previous assault, the broken ribs while I was pregnant, the 800 miles I moved to get away from him, and how he somehow found us anyway. Fletcher shows the officer his doorbell camera footage, and they watch it together on his phone, seeing Jackson's face clear as day as he crossed the yard chasing us. The officer nods and says this is good evidence, solid proof of what happened, and he'll make sure it gets included in the report. The officer with the notepad closes it and looks at my ankle, which I notice is twice its normal size now and turning purple. He says I should really get checked out at the hospital, especially since I'm holding a baby and might have done serious damage when I landed wrong jumping from the window. I shake my head and tell him I'm not taking Lily to an ER at midnight when it's probably just a sprain, and besides, I can't leave her with anyone while I get x-rays. Fletcher appears with an ice pack wrapped in a dish towel and hands it to me, and I press it against my ankle while trying to keep Lily calm on my other hip. A paramedic arrives and kneels down to examine my ankle without making me move much, pressing gently on different spots and asking me to flex my foot. She says it's likely just a bad sprain, but I should stay off it for a few days and keep it elevated, and she wraps it with an elastic bandage from her kit. The officer starts asking me questions for his report, and I go through everything in order, trying to keep my voice steady and factual. I tell him about the texts from unknown numbers, the bathroom window I'd checked 3 times, Jackson's voice through the bedroom door, the knife he pulled when I refused to give him Lily. The paramedic finishes with my ankle and moves to check Lily over, looking in her ears and eyes with a small light, listening to her breathing, making sure she wasn't hurt during our escape across the yard. Lily fusses and reaches for me, and the paramedic assures me she seems fine, just scared from all the chaos and strange people. About an hour passes with officers going in and out, taking photos of my apartment, bagging evidence, and a detective finally shows up who introduces himself as Zachary Schaffer. He's maybe 50 with gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck, and something about his calm, methodical way of moving makes me feel like maybe he actually knows what he's doing. He sits down across from me at Fletcher's kitchen table and pulls out a small notepad, and he starts asking detailed questions in this patient voice that doesn't make me feel rushed. He wants to know everything about my history with Jackson, so I tell him about the assault 3 years ago that put me in the hospital with broken ribs, while I was pregnant, about how I'd hidden the pregnancy from Jackson, because I knew he'd either force me to get rid of it or use it to control me forever. Detective Schaffer writes everything down in careful block print, asking follow-up questions about dates and locations, and whether I'd filed police reports back then. I explain I had filed a report after the hospital visit, but then I disappeared before the court date because I was too scared to testify, and I can see him making notes about that. He asks about the threatening texts, and I describe the 2 messages, and he nods when I mention they came from unknown numbers, saying they'll subpoena phone records to try tracking them down. We go through tonight's timeline step by step, from when I heard the bathroom window open to when I pounded on Fletcher's door, and he writes it all down without rushing me or making me feel like I'm being dramatic. Fletcher brings me his phone because mine is sitting in an evidence bag on the table, and I realize I need to call my sister to let her know we're okay. I dial her number and she answers on the first ring, her voice high and panicked, asking where I am and if Lily's safe. I tell her I can't explain everything right now, but Jackson found us and broke into the apartment and we're okay, but we're with the police. She immediately starts firing questions at me, asking how he found us and where we are now and whether I'm hurt, and I have to cut her off. I tell her I'll call tomorrow with more details, but we can't talk about any of this on the phone right now because it's not secure, and she needs to trust me that we're safe for tonight. She's crying and saying she should drive up right now, but I tell her no, not yet. I'll let her know when it's safe for her to come. I hang up before she can argue more because I can't handle her panic on top of my own exhaustion. Detective Schaffer closes his notepad and looks at me with this serious expression, and he says I shouldn't stay at my apartment tonight or maybe even for a while. He pulls a business card from his wallet and hands it to me, explaining it's for a domestic violence hotline that can arrange emergency shelter placement. I stare at the card and feel something inside me crumble. This independence I'd worked so hard to build just dissolving because Jackson contaminated the home I'd made for Lily and me. The detective explains that Jackson knows where I live now, and even though officers will increase patrols in the area, they can't post someone outside my door 24 hours a day. I nod and take the card, accepting that we need to disappear again, that the 800 miles I'd put between us and Jackson wasn't enough. Fletcher offers to let us stay with him, but Detective Schaffer gently suggests a confidential shelter would be safer, since Jackson has already been to this property, and knows Fletcher helped us. I call the number on the card, and a tired-sounding woman answers, listening to my situation and telling me someone will meet me at the police station to start intake. Detective Schaffer offers to drive us there since my car is still parked at my apartment, and I shouldn't go back there alone. We gather up Lily's diaper bag and the few things Fletcher helped me grab from my place earlier, and I thank him about 5 times for everything he did tonight. He gives me his phone number and tells me to call if I need anything, and I can see he feels bad that helping us put him in Jackson's crosshairs too. At the police station, a woman named Judith Gonzalez meets us around 3 in the morning, speaking in this low, steady voice that doesn't make me feel judged or stupid for staying with Jackson as long as I did. She has kind eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair, and she sits down with me in a small private room while Detective Schaffer finishes some paperwork. Judith explains what a safety plan looks like, walking me through things like varying my routes, checking cars before getting in, having code words with trusted people. She outlines shelter intake procedures and rules, and she asks permission before touching my arm in this reassuring way. For the first time all night, I feel like maybe someone actually understands how scared I am, not just of Jackson, but of losing everything I'd built and having to start over again. She explains the shelter location is confidential, and I can't tell anyone where we are, not even family, because information leaks and abusers are good at manipulation. The shelter intake happens at dawn in an unmarked building on the other side of town, where a tired staff member with a clipboard meets us at a side entrance. She walks us through rules about curfews and confidentiality, explains the shared kitchen duties and laundry schedule, and emphasizes how important it is that I don't tell anyone outside the shelter where we are. Lily gets assigned a portable crib in our small private room, which has a twin bed, a dresser, and a window with bars on it that makes my stomach turn. The staff member hands me a thick folder of resources, information about legal aid and counseling and job assistance, and I try to process that this sterile institutional space with its industrial carpet and fluorescent lights is now home. I set up the portable crib and put Lily down, and she falls asleep immediately, because it's been hours past her normal bedtime, and she's exhausted from all the chaos. By mid-morning, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed with the shelter's phone, leaving a voicemail for my landlord about needing to break my lease due to a domestic violence emergency. I try to sound calm and reasonable, hoping he'll understand the situation and let me out without penalty. He calls back about an hour later, and his voice is sympathetic but firm when he says the lease is legally binding and I'll owe 2 months' rent if I want to terminate early. That's money I absolutely don't have right now, and I feel panic rising in my chest as I realize Jackson isn't just taking my safety, he's taking my financial stability too. The landlord suggests I might qualify for some kind of domestic violence exception, but he's not sure, and he gives me a number for a tenants' rights hotline. I call my work's HR department next and explain I need emergency leave starting immediately, keeping the details vague but mentioning there's a safety situation involving my ex. The HR representative is kind but professional, saying I can take up to 2 weeks unpaid leave, but they'll need documentation when I return, like a police report or court order. I feel guilty about the instability this creates for my team since I'm supposed to be covering a big project deadline, but I can't exactly go into the office when Jackson might be watching the parking lot. The representative assures me they'll figure something out and tells me to focus on staying safe, and I'm grateful my company is at least trying to be understanding. Judith stops by the shelter that afternoon and sits with me at the small table in the common room, walking me through the process of getting a temporary protective order. She explains that we file paperwork with the court describing Jackson's threats and violence, and a judge can grant a temporary order pretty quickly. The catch is that someone has to physically serve the papers to Jackson for the order to take legal effect, which means finding him first. The whole system suddenly feels like both a lifeline and an impossibly slow bureaucracy, and I'm not sure whether to feel hopeful that there's a legal process for this or frustrated that it's so complicated. Judith assures me she'll help with every step and connects me with a legal aid attorney who can represent me for free. That evening, Detective Schaffer calls the shelter's main line, and they transfer him to me, and he tells me Fletcher shared his doorbell camera footage with the police. The video clearly shows Jackson's face as he crossed the yard chasing us, and the detective sounds satisfied with the evidence quality, because it's time-stamped and high resolution. I feel this small surge of vindication mixed with renewed fear, because Jackson's face on camera means this is all really undeniably happening, not some nightmare I can wake up from. The detective says they're working on getting a warrant issued for Jackson's arrest on breaking and entering, assault and stalking charges, and knowing there's actual forward movement in the case helps me breathe a little easier. He reminds me to keep my location confidential and to call immediately if I see Jackson anywhere, and I promise I will, even though the thought of seeing him again makes my hands shake. That night, I sit at the shelter's shared computer in the small office area and log into my cloud storage accounts, starting with email backups I haven't touched in over a year. The login history shows attempts from IP addresses in 3 different states, all within the past 6 weeks. Someone systematically trying passwords and security questions. My old Gmail account that I abandoned when I fled shows failed login attempts every few days going back 2 months. And the pattern makes my stomach turn because it means Jackson wasn't just lucky finding me. He'd been hunting methodically for weeks before those texts started. I screenshot everything and email it to Detective Schaffer, then change every password to random strings I write in a notebook, and I realize how naive I'd been thinking distance and a name change would be enough. The timestamps tell a story of obsessive searching, someone checking and rechecking, trying different combinations, never giving up. And I sit there staring at the screen feeling violated in a new way, because he'd been inside my digital life long before he showed up at my apartment. The next morning, Detective Schaffer calls the shelter's main line, and the staff transfers it to me, and he tells me Jackson's on parole in this state, which I didn't know because I'd assumed he was still locked up somewhere far away. His parole officer got notified about the break-in and the assault, and they're preparing a warrant for his arrest on breaking and entering, assault, and violation of parole conditions. Schaffer sounds cautiously optimistic when he explains this could mean serious time if they catch him, and for the first time since my sister's call, I let myself feel like maybe the system will actually protect us instead of just shuffling papers. He reminds me to stay at the shelter and keep my location confidential, and I promise I will, even though part of me wants to believe the worst is over. Later that afternoon, Judith finds me in the common room and sits down with a legal pad, saying we need to practice my testimony for the protective order hearing. She coaches me through the questions a judge will ask, telling me to stick to specific facts and dates, avoid emotional language that defense attorneys will twist, and never engage with Jackson if we pass in the hallways. I'm anxious about facing him in court, my hands already sweating thinking about sitting in the same room, but Judith's practical approach makes it feel less impossible. She makes me practice saying he broke into my apartment instead of he terrified me, and he sent threatening texts instead of I was so scared, and I start to understand this is a skill I can learn, not just an ordeal I have to survive. We run through it 3 times until my answers sound factual and calm, and she nods approvingly, telling me I'm doing better than most people on their first try. That evening, a legal aid attorney named Daniela Allen calls the shelter asking for me, explaining Judith made a referral and she wants to represent me for the protective order filing at no cost. She has this direct, competent way of talking that immediately puts me at ease, not pitying or overly gentle, just straightforward about what we need to do. She starts gathering documentation over the phone, asking about the police report number, Fletcher's video, the text messages, and the hospital records from the assault that put me unconscious. Daniela explains what evidence will be most persuasive to a judge, and I feel this weight lifting as I realize I don't have to navigate the legal system alone anymore. She says she'll start drafting the paperwork tonight and we can review it tomorrow, and her confidence makes me believe we might actually win this. The next day, during my daily check-in call with my sister, I'm scrolling through old photos on her phone when I notice one she posted 4 months ago, showing Lily in her car seat with a distinctive rainbow sticker visible on the side. My stomach drops as I stare at that sticker, the same one that's on the car seat I brought to the shelter, And I realized Jackson could have used details like that to confirm he'd found the right person. I feel stupid for not thinking about how even innocent posts could be weaponized. How a grandmother commenting, beautiful granddaughter, or a friend asking, how old is she now, could give him the information he needed. I tell my sister we can't talk about this on the phone and I'll explain later. Then I spend 20 minutes going through her social media, making her delete anything mentioning me or Lily, and she's apologizing, but I'm too angry and scared to reassure her right now. The next morning, Judith helps me set up fraud alerts with my phone carrier, and while we're on hold, the representative mentions someone attempted a SIM swap on my number overnight, which would have given them access to all my calls and texts. The carrier blocked it thanks to the alert we just set up, but I'm shaking as I realize how close Jackson came to intercepting everything. Every conversation with Judith and Daniela and Detective Schaffer. Judith stays calm and walks me through additional security measures, setting up a PIN that has to be verified for any account changes, and I'm learning there are so many ways he's trying to access my life that I never even knew existed. The representative confirms the SIM swap attempt came from a location 3 states away, which means Jackson might not even be nearby anymore. He could be anywhere running this campaign remotely. That afternoon, Daniela files for an emergency protective order at the courthouse and calls me 2 hours later saying we got a court date within 72 hours, which she explains is fast for our county. The judge granted a temporary order based on the police report and Fletcher's video, and I feel this fragile sense of relief knowing there's now a legal barrier between Jackson and us, even if it's just paper. Daniela explains the temporary order is in effect immediately, but we still need the hearing to make it permanent, and she's already preparing our evidence presentation. I ask what happens if he violates it, and she says he can be arrested on site, which should make me feel safer, but I know Jackson well enough to understand he doesn't care about legal consequences when he's angry. A process server tries to deliver the protective order paperwork to an address associated with Jackson's cousin the next day, but Jackson dodges him, and the server logs the attempted service in his report. Daniela calls to explain this creates a paper trail showing Jackson's awareness and evasion, which will help our case when we get to the hearing, but I'm frustrated that legal technicalities mean he's still out there unserved. She assures me the temporary order is still valid and police can enforce it, but without official service, Jackson could claim he didn't know about it, and the whole system suddenly feels designed to protect his rights more than my safety. I thank her for the update and hang up feeling deflated, because every step forward seems to come with a technicality that lets Jackson slip through. That evening, I attend a group session at the shelter where 6 other women sit in a circle sharing their stories and hearing their experiences with checking locks 5 times before bed and scanning parking lots for familiar cars makes me feel less alone. One woman describes sleeping with a baseball bat under her bed for 2 years after her ex was incarcerated, and everyone nods in understanding. And I realize this constant fear I'm carrying isn't me being weak or paranoid. It's a normal response to abnormal danger. They talk about safety planning and rebuilding their lives, and I share about the cloud backups and the SIM swap attempt, and the other women aren't shocked. They've all dealt with similar invasions. We end the session by going around the circle saying one thing we did this week to take back control. And when it's my turn, I say I got a legal aid attorney and a protective order, and the women clap quietly. And for the first time, I feel like maybe I'm not just surviving. I'm actually fighting back. The next morning, my HR representative emails requesting a written statement about my leave for their records, and I spend an hour with Daniela on the phone crafting something that discloses the minimum necessary while protecting my privacy. We go through multiple drafts, removing anything too specific about locations or Jackson's identity, and we settle on language about credible threats from a former partner with an attached police report number. Daniela explains this gives my employer what they need legally without creating a document that could be subpoenaed and used against me later, and I'm learning to think strategically about every piece of paper with my name on it. I send the email and feel more in control having clear boundaries about what my employer needs to know, and Daniela reminds me that protecting my privacy isn't being difficult, it's being smart about safety. Detective Schaffer calls the next morning, and his voice sounds tired but patient as he explains something I never knew about. He tells me Jackson probably used what's called a data broker service to find my new phone number and maybe even my address. I ask what that means, and he walks me through how these companies collect public records from all over, things like property records and voter registration and utility hookups. Then they package it all up and sell it to anyone with a credit card. The whole thing is legal, completely legal, and I feel sick hearing this because I'd worked so hard to disappear. I changed my name, deleted my social media, moved 800 miles away, and it turns out companies were selling my information the whole time. Detective Schaffer gives me a list of the biggest data broker sites and says I should opt out of all of them if I can. I thank him and hang up feeling violated all over again, like my privacy was never really mine to control. Judith stops by the shelter that afternoon and I show her the list Detective Schaffer sent. She helps me identify which sites are most important, and we spend the next several hours on the shelter's computer going through opt-out processes. Each site has different requirements and some want photo ID uploaded, and others need notarized forms mailed in. I freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus, Equifax and Experian and TransUnion, entering my information over and over while Lily plays on the floor next to me. Judith helps me start the paperwork for the address confidentiality program, which requires a bunch of forms and an application explaining why I need protection. My hand cramps from writing and my eyes hurt from staring at the screen, but I keep going because each step means I'm taking back some control. By evening, I've opted out of 12 data broker sites, frozen my credit, and submitted the confidentiality program pre-screening. It's exhausting work, boring and tedious, but it feels like progress even though I know Jackson already has the information he needs. Fletcher calls while I'm making dinner in the shelter's shared kitchen, and his voice sounds shaken. He tells me someone went through his mailbox overnight, pulled out all his letters, and scattered them across his front lawn. He filed a police report this morning, and the officers took photos of everything. I feel terrible hearing this because Fletcher only got involved by helping me, and now Jackson's targeting him too. I apologize over and over, but Fletcher cuts me off and says he'd do it again in a heartbeat. He's just glad Lily and I got out safely. He mentions his doorbell camera caught someone's shadow around 3 in the morning, but the person stayed out of frame on purpose. We talk for a few more minutes, and I promise to keep him updated. Then I hang up feeling guilty that my problems are spreading to people who don't deserve them. The next afternoon, Daniela comes to the shelter, and we sit in a private meeting room preparing for the protective order hearing. She role-plays being Jackson's attorney, asking me aggressive questions designed to make me look unreliable or overdramatic. She pretends to suggest I'm exaggerating what happened, that Jackson just wanted to see his daughter, that I'm keeping his child from him unfairly. I stumble through my answers at first, getting defensive and trying to explain too much. Daniela stops me and teaches me to pause before answering, to redirect every question back to documented facts, to resist the urge to justify myself. She makes me practice saying things like, the police report documents what happened, and the hospital records from the previous assault speak for themselves. After an hour of this, I start to feel less shaky, more confident that maybe I can handle sitting across from Jackson's lawyer without falling apart. Daniela reminds me that the truth is on my side, and I just need to state it clearly without getting emotional. My sister calls that evening, and her voice is small and apologetic. She tells me she mentioned to a mutual friend from our hometown that I was living somewhere in the western part of the state. She didn't give specifics, didn't name a city, but she realizes now that even vague information could have helped Jackson narrow his search. I feel hurt and angry hearing this because I'd been so careful, and she'd undermined it without thinking. But I also know she didn't understand how dangerous even small details could be, how Jackson would use any scrap of information to track me down. I take a breath and set a firm boundary, telling her that from now on she tells no one anything about my location or my life, period. Not vague regions, not general updates, nothing. She agrees immediately and apologizes again, and I can hear she feels awful about it. We talk for a few more minutes about Lily and normal things. Then I hang up feeling both frustrated and relieved that she finally understands the stakes. Detective Schaffer calls 2 days later with news that sounds almost too good to believe. He got a warrant approved for Jackson's phone records based on Fletcher's video evidence and the recording of my 911 call. The warrant will show Jackson's location data for the past month and all his calls and texts, which means they'll be able to prove he was stalking me and document who he's been in contact with. This feels like the investigation is finally building real momentum instead of just taking statements and filing reports. I allow myself to hope that maybe Jackson will actually face consequences this time, instead of charming his way out of trouble like he always did before. The detective says the phone company has 10 days to comply with the warrant, and he'll keep me updated. That evening, the shelter runs a safety drill, and all the residents practice evacuating with our children. A staff member times us as we grab our go bags and get down the stairs to the designated meeting point outside. I manage to get Lily and our bag out in under 2 minutes, which feels fast, but the staff member says I should aim for 90 seconds. It's grim practice, thinking about having to run again, but it's necessary because Jackson's still out there somewhere. After the drill, I go through our go bag and refine what's in it, making sure we have enough diapers and formula, copies of all our important documents, $300 in cash, and the burner phone Judith gave me. Everything fits in one backpack so I can carry Lily and the bag at the same time if I need to. The next morning, Judith helps me set up a P.O. box through the address confidentiality program. Instead of a regular post office box, my mail will get forwarded through a state program that masks my actual address. Any mail sent to my substitute address goes to a secure facility first, then gets forwarded to wherever I'm actually living, and Jackson won't be able to trace it. It takes an hour to fill out the paperwork and get everything processed, but when I walk out with my new substitute address, I feel like there's one more layer of protection between us and him. Judith explains that safety isn't one big solution. It's dozens of these small, tedious precautions that add up over time. Detective Schaffer calls that afternoon, and his voice sounds serious when he tells me Jackson missed his scheduled parole check-in yesterday. His parole officer issued an alert flagging him as non-compliant, which means if any police officer encounters Jackson anywhere in the state, they can hold him immediately without needing a new warrant. This doesn't catch Jackson, but it does increase the chances someone will spot him and detain him. The detective says Jackson's probably lying low somewhere, maybe staying with friends or family, but eventually he'll slip up. I thank him for the update and hang up feeling both relieved and anxious, because Jackson being flagged as non-compliant means he's even more desperate now. I need to go back to my old apartment to pick up some mail that arrived before I changed my address, so the next morning I drive over there with Lily in her car seat. The parking lot looks the same as always, and I park in my old spot out of habit. When I get out, I notice immediately that my front passenger tire is completely flat, slashed open with a clean cut that couldn't be from running over something. I walk around the car and feel my stomach drop when I see the back tire on the same side is slashed too. The parking lot has cameras, but I already know they won't show anything useful because this section has always had a blind spot. I call the police and they send an officer who documents the damage and takes photos, adding it to the growing file on Jackson's harassment. The officer asks if I have any proof Jackson did this, and I say no. But who else would slash 2 tires on a car belonging to someone with an active protective order? My anger is starting to overtake my fear as I stand there looking at the ruined tires, because the violations just keep piling up, and Jackson keeps finding ways to hurt me even when he's supposedly being monitored by his parole officer. I call the towing company and they say they can come out in about 3 hours to replace both tires, which means I'm stuck here at my old apartment complex where Jackson clearly knows I come. I take Lily inside the building lobby where at least there are other people around and security cameras, and I sit on the hard plastic chairs near the mailboxes watching every car that pulls into the lot. My phone rings and it's Daniela calling with an update about the protective order hearing, and she tells me the court scheduled it for next Wednesday at 10 in the morning. She starts walking me through the logistics in her calm, professional voice, explaining that I should arrive through the south entrance of the courthouse where there's a separate security checkpoint for domestic violence cases. We're going to meet in a private waiting room reserved for people with protective orders, and Judith will come with me as my victim advocate, plus an officer will escort us from the parking garage straight to that room. Daniela asks what I'm planning to wear, and I feel confused about why that matters until she explains that I need to look credible and sympathetic, without looking like I'm trying too hard. So business casual is best. Nothing too fancy or too casual. We go through every single detail of how the day will work, from where I'll park to which bathroom I should use to how I'll exit the building afterward. Because the courthouse is a public space where Jackson has every legal right to be, and we need to minimize any chance of contact. She reminds me that even with the temporary order in place, courthouses have rules about access, and Jackson's attorney might advise him to show up and try to approach me in the hallways to make me look unstable or unreasonable. I write down everything she says on the back of a junk mail envelope I grabbed from my mailbox, my handwriting shaky but readable. The tow truck finally arrives, and I watch through the lobby window as the driver works on my car, constantly scanning the parking lot for any sign of Jackson or his vehicle. Detective Schaffer calls while I'm waiting and tells me the police lab finished authenticating Fletcher's doorbell video, which means they've established proper chain of custody and verified the footage hasn't been tampered with. Daniela's going to add it to our hearing exhibits, and the detective sounds satisfied with how solid our evidence package is getting. He emails me a still frame from the video showing Jackson's face clearly visible as he chased me across the yard. And seeing that frozen moment makes my hands start shaking again because it's undeniable proof that I'm not making this up or exaggerating the danger. The tow truck driver finishes and hands me a bill for $400 that I barely have in my account, but I pay it and drive straight back to the shelter, checking my mirrors the entire way. 2 days later, I'm at work trying to focus on my computer screen when the HR representative appears at my desk, holding a thick manila envelope. She asks if I can step into her office for a moment, and my stomach immediately drops because nothing good ever starts that way. She closes the door and hands me the envelope, explaining that it arrived this morning addressed to me at the company, and given everything I'd told them about my safety situation, they wanted to give it to me privately. I open it with shaking fingers and pull out a legal document that makes my vision actually tunnel at the edges. It's a custody petition from Jackson's attorney claiming he deserves parenting time with Lily because she's his biological daughter, and he has parental rights under state law. The legal language talks about his desire to establish a relationship with his child and his fundamental right to participate in her upbringing. And there's no mention anywhere of the fact that he broke into my home with a knife or that he put me in the hospital while I was pregnant. This new front in his campaign to control us feels overwhelming in a way that makes it hard to breathe, because now he's using the legal system itself as a weapon to get access to Lily. The HR representative waits quietly while I read through the papers, and then she asks if there's anything the company can do to help with my safety at work. I tell her about the protective order hearing next week, and how Jackson knows where I work, and she immediately offers to have all my future mail held in a locked office, rather than delivered to my desk where anyone could see it. She asks if I need any other workplace accommodations, and her matter-of-fact support without prying questions makes me feel less ashamed about the whole situation. I thank her and head back to my desk with the custody papers, and I call Daniela as soon as I get a break. Daniela sounds angry when I tell her about the petition, not at me, but at Jackson's attorney for filing it while criminal charges are pending. She says she'll file a motion to consolidate everything at the protective order hearing and argue that Jackson shouldn't have any contact or visitation rights while he's facing charges and protection orders. Detective Schaffer calls that afternoon with more good news about the investigation, and he shares preliminary results from Jackson's phone records that show cell tower pings near my apartment complex on the night of the break-in. The technical data corroborates the exact timeline and proves his presence in the area, which feels more solid than just my testimony alone. I'm relieved to have objective evidence backing up what I lived through, because I know defense attorneys love to suggest that victims are confused or mistaken about details. The next day, I get a call from the Address Confidentiality Program office telling me my application got approved pending the court order, which means once the protective order is finalized, all my official records will show only the substitute address. It's a small victory, but it feels meaningful, and I'm starting to see how multiple layers of protection working together might actually keep us hidden from Jackson long term. The protective order hearing happens on a Wednesday morning, and I sit in the courtroom gallery with Daniela, while the judge reviews all the evidence we submitted. The judge is a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose. And she takes her time going through Fletcher's video footage, the threatening texts, the police reports from the break-in, and the hospital records from when Jackson put me in the emergency room while I was pregnant. She asks Jackson's attorney if his client disputes any of the documented incidents, and the attorney admits they don't dispute the basic facts, but want to argue about Jackson's intent and current threat level. The judge cuts him off and says intent doesn't matter when someone breaks into a home with a knife and violates parole conditions. She grants a 1-year protective order with no contact provisions, which means Jackson can't call, text, email, or come within 500 feet of me or Lily. She orders him to surrender any guns he owns within 24 hours, and she bars him from seeking custody or visitation rights until his criminal charges get resolved. I feel my shoulders drop with relief as the judge's words make it official, even though I know paper protection only works if Jackson actually follows the rules. Daniela squeezes my arm and whispers that this is a strong order, and we got everything we asked for. We're gathering our papers to leave the courtroom when I have to walk past Jackson's table to reach the exit. He's standing there with his attorney, and as I pass he looks directly at me and mouths something that looks like, "This isn't over," with this cold smile that makes my stomach turn. I keep walking, but Daniela saw it too, and she immediately stops and points up at the court security camera mounted above the door. She tells the bailiff what just happened and requests the footage for our violation file, and the bailiff nods and makes a note. What should have been a moment of victory celebrating the protective order is already tainted by Jackson's refusal to accept any boundaries the court sets. Daniela walks me out through the secure hallway and explains that if the video shows what we think it shows, we can file a violation report before we even leave the building. I'm shaking again because even with a judge's order and officers nearby, Jackson still found a way to threaten me and make me feel unsafe. Outside the courthouse, I'm standing with my victim advocate escort near the main steps waiting for Daniela to bring her car around when I see Jackson come through the main doors with his attorney. He's supposed to stay away from me, but instead he walks directly toward where I'm standing and gets within maybe 15 feet before 2 officers notice and intercept him. They grab his arms and tell him to stop, and one officer pulls out the protective order paperwork and shows Jackson the 500-foot restriction that was literally just issued 10 minutes ago. Jackson acts confused and says he was just trying to get to his car, but the officers aren't buying it, and they put him in handcuffs right there on the courthouse steps. I watch in complete shock as they walk him back inside, and Detective Schaffer's car pulls up because someone called him about the violation. Schaffer gets out and coordinates with the officers and Jackson's parole officer, who apparently was waiting nearby in case something like this happened. They take Jackson to a holding cell in the courthouse basement, and I realize he just violated a court order before the ink was even dry on the paperwork. Detective Schaffer comes over to where I'm standing and explains that Jackson is being held in county jail, pending a parole revocation hearing. He says the parole board will review the protective order violation, along with the original break-in charges, and if they determine Jackson violated his release conditions, he could be locked up for months. The detective's voice is calm and matter-of-fact like he deals with this situation all the time, but for me it's the first time in weeks I can actually breathe knowing Jackson is physically contained behind bars. Schaffer gives me his card again and tells me to call if I need anything, and he promises they'll notify me before any court dates, or if Jackson's status changes. For the first time since this nightmare started, I feel like maybe the system is actually working to protect us, instead of just documenting the danger after the fact. I'm still afraid to believe this will last because Jackson has gotten out of trouble before, but at least right now he can't show up at my apartment or follow me to the park. Judith meets me at the shelter that afternoon and tells me she found a spot in a short-term confidential housing program for domestic violence survivors. The building is a high-rise downtown with controlled entry and a doorman who checks IDs before letting anyone up. We load Lily's portable crib and our bags into Judith's car and drive across town to this modern building that looks like regular apartments, not a shelter. The unit is on the 8th floor, and being up that high with a locked elevator makes me feel safer than I have since Jackson found us. The apartment is small with just one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room, but it's clean, and the windows have good locks, and there's a deadbolt on the front door. Lily immediately starts exploring the new space on her hands and knees, pulling herself up on the coffee table and babbling happy sounds that make my chest ache with relief. Judith helps me unpack and shows me how to use the building's security system, and she gives me emergency numbers for the property manager and the after-hours crisis line. The next day, I get a thick envelope in the mail at my P.O. box, and inside is official confirmation that my address confidentiality program enrollment got finalized. The letter explains that my DMV records, voter registration, and other state databases now show only the substitute address instead of my actual location. It's surreal to have an official identity that exists separately from my physical location, like I'm living 2 different lives at the same time. The program coordinator included a laminated card with my substitute address and instructions for how to handle situations where someone requests my real address. I'm supposed to give them the substitute address, and the state will forward any mail or legal documents to my actual P.O. box. It feels like the protection I need to rebuild our lives without constantly looking over my shoulder wondering if Jackson will show up. I put the card in my wallet next to Lily's insurance card and my own ID, and it's strange seeing that fake address listed as my home. Daniela calls that same afternoon and tells me she filed a motion to dismiss Jackson's custody petition entirely pending the outcome of his criminal case. She got a status conference scheduled for next month where she'll argue that Jackson's parental rights should be suspended given the protective order and his current incarceration. She sounds confident on the phone, explaining how the judge will have to weigh Jackson's rights as a biological father against Lily's safety and welfare. The law in our state says courts have to consider domestic violence history when making custody decisions, and Jackson's pattern of violence toward me combined with the break-in and protective order violation should be enough to deny him any access. The legal system is finally working in our favor, and I'm cautiously hopeful that this might actually stick. Daniela warns me not to get too comfortable because Jackson could still fight this from jail, but at least we have momentum and documented evidence on our side. I start therapy the following week through a program Judith recommended that specializes in domestic violence trauma. The counselor is a woman maybe in her 40s who has this calm, steady way of talking that doesn't make me feel judged or broken. We talk about hypervigilance and how my constant checking of locks and scanning parking lots is a normal response to real danger, not paranoia. She explains intrusive thoughts and why I keep replaying the moment Jackson broke through my bathroom window, even though I'm safe now. We discuss how to process fear while still staying appropriately cautious, because the danger isn't completely gone, just reduced. She helps me see that I can heal from this trauma without pretending the danger was never real, or that I'm being dramatic about ongoing safety concerns. The therapy gives me tools for managing panic attacks and sleeping better, and recognizing when my fear response is helpful versus when it's taking over my whole life. My HR department finalizes a flexible work schedule that lets me work from home 3 days a week temporarily while I'm getting stabilized. They don't make me feel guilty about it or suggest I'm being difficult. The HR representative sends me an email outlining the arrangement and says they'll revisit it in 3 months to see if I need to extend it. Having employment security while dealing with everything else removes one major stressor from my life. I was terrified they'd decide I was too much trouble or unreliable because of all the emergency leave and court dates, but instead they're willing to accommodate my safety needs. I set up a little workspace in the corner of the new apartment where I can keep an eye on Lily while she plays and still get my work done. The routine of logging in and completing tasks gives me something normal to focus on, besides court dates and safety planning. My old landlord finally agrees to terminate my lease without penalty, after Daniela sends an official letter on legal aid letterhead, citing the domestic violence lease termination law. I didn't even know that law existed, but apparently most states have provisions allowing survivors to break leases early if they're fleeing abuse. The landlord had been insisting I owed 2 months' rent, but the law is clear that he can't charge me if I provide documentation of the domestic violence. It's a relief to close that chapter and not owe money I don't have. One more thread tying me to the apartment where Jackson attacked us gets cut. I won't have to go back there to collect mail or deal with move-out inspections. The landlord can keep my security deposit to cover cleaning, and that's fine with me. I just want that place and everything associated with it completely out of my life, so Lily and I can focus on building something new and safe. I set up new routines in our secure apartment over the next few weeks. Every time I take Lily to the park, I pick a different route, sometimes going 3 blocks out of our way just to avoid patterns. I keep door wedges in my diaper bag next to the wipes and extra bottles. My sister and I work out code words for emergencies, simple phrases that sound normal but mean I need help right away. I check in with Judith every Tuesday morning like clockwork, updating her on anything that feels off or unsafe. These habits used to make me feel crazy, like I was being too scared about nothing. Now they just feel like smart planning, the kind of things any mom would do to keep her baby safe. I'm learning to trust my gut about what feels right and what doesn't. When something seems wrong, I don't talk myself out of it anymore. Jackson's parole hearing happens on a cold morning in late October. Daniela calls me that afternoon with the news. The parole board looked at everything: the break-in at my apartment, him showing up at the courthouse right after the judge ordered him to stay away, missing his required check-in with his parole officer. They voted to take away his parole completely. He has to serve out the rest of his original sentence plus face new charges for everything he did. Daniela walks me through the timeline and explains we have at least 18 months before he could get released again. It's not forever, and I know that. But it's enough time to breathe. Enough time to build something more solid for Lily and me. Enough time to plan better for when he gets out again, because I know he will eventually. That night, I go through our bedtime routine with Lily in our new apartment. Bath time with her rubber ducks. Pajamas with the little elephants on them. Bottle while I rock her in the chair by the window. The motion sensor light in the hallway clicks on, and I freeze for just a second. Then I hear footsteps going past our door and the sound of someone setting down a package. Just a delivery person doing their job. I stand at Lily's crib watching her sleep, her tiny chest going up and down with each breath. I let myself feel how safe this moment is without waiting for something bad to happen. We built real protection around us with the legal orders and the secure building and all the careful planning. I'll always stay watchful because that's just how it is now. But tonight I can stand here and watch my daughter sleep and know we did everything right to keep her safe. Well, at least the parole board actually did their job eventually. 18 months isn't forever, but it's breathing room, which is something. If you stuck around for this whole saga, go ahead and subscribe. I've got more coming your way. See you later, and maybe check what info those data brokers have on you.